Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. That is a big ask of us, to believe in something that we cannot sense. We cannot feel it, see it, hear it, taste it, or smell it, but it is there, and we believe it. There is a short poem by Emily Dickinson that I find intriguing. And actually, it's probably the only poem that I know by heart and can recite it. It is entitled Faith. It goes like this. Faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. And I think this encapsulates our experiences with faith sometimes. Faith is easy when things are going well and do not require too much of us. It is not hard to believe in God's promises when your stomach is adequately filled, your bank account has enough and maybe a little bit more, you are healthy, and life just generally seems to be going your way. However, when things turn south, our faith sometimes falters. And that's a normal thing. Having doubts does not mean that we lack faith, but that God's faith in God just seems distant and maybe not understandable. And sometimes in those situations, we rely more on our own devices than on God's promises. We plow ahead doing what we think we should be doing, only to discover later on of our own folly. Now, that's not to say in an emergency or in times of doubts that sometimes our own devices are necessary, like microscopes. After all, if God is the God of all creation, didn't God have a hand in the creation and use of microscopes? Having faith in God is still a big ask. A promise was made to Abram, and by any stretch of the imagination, this promise was a wild one. Here is Abram, old and with a wife that is only a few years younger, and it seems that despite their faithfulness, life had passed them by, and they were without any heirs. They had no children. Yet God promised to Abram something extraordinary, a child, and that he, Abram, would have a great family, numbering more than the stars in the sky or the grains of sand on the beach. How can this be? Sarai was way past her childbearing years, yet Abram believed, and not knowing how this was going to be accomplished. And he also probably knew that he would never live long enough to see his multitudinous descendants as God had promised. Yet he still believed, and God deemed it as righteousness. And what did Abram do that was righteous? He believed. He had faith in God, and that God would keep the promises that he had made. Abram had faith that God was faithful. He had a faith in that promise of God, and he acted in faith on those promises. He stayed not in his own land, but in a foreign land that had been promised to him by God. He did not live in a house with foundations. No, he lived in a tent. He sacrificed in reliance on God's promises. And even though Abram never saw the complete fruition of those promises, he still kept his faith in God and was rewarded for his faithfulness. Now, blind faith does have its downsides. In our baptismal covenant, we ask for an inquiring and discerning heart and the courage to will and persevere. There's a story I have of a pious man, a very religious man, who lived in an area that was subject to flooding. You probably have already heard this before anyway. A flood warning was issued. The sheriff's deputies were sent out, warning the people of the impending flood and that they should evacuate the area. The pious man declined to evacuate, and instead he depended upon providential intervention. Well, the floodwaters came and covered the living area of the house, so the pious man had to go upstairs. And a boat was sent out to rescue him. Again, he declined to take up the offer of a boat ride out of there, saying that the Lord would provide. Now, the floodwaters rose, and he had to go up into the attic and eventually chop his way into the roof of the house. A helicopter then flew by with a dangling rope ladder, and it was within easy reach, but he just knew that the Lord was going to save him from the flood. So he bypassed the helicopter. The storm raged on. The waters rose and rose over the top of the roof of the house, and you could probably imagine what happened next. Well, so the pious man gets to the pearly gates, and although being very pious that he is happy to be there, but he's perplexed. And he asks St. Peter, "Why didn't God rescue me?" St. Peter looks at him with kindness and some exasperation and tells him that he tried to rescue him 3 times, the deputy's warning, the boat, the helicopter, but that he just didn't listen. His faith, the pious man's faith, didn't have the willingness to discern that God's promises aren't always what they seem to be. Sometimes it's sort of a divine cryptic crossword puzzle. Eventually, it does make sense. The outcome of these promises may not be what we imagine or what we desire right now within our own selfishness. God's promises they're a place where things are turned upside down, where the master serves the servants. Jesus promises us a kingdom where there is an unfailing treasure, a place where no rust decays, moth destroys, or thief steals. Our faith gives us hope and something to look forward to in this life. That faith is an assurance of what is to come, whether it be the next hour, tomorrow, next week, next year, or at the time of our death. With faith, we have that conviction of God's promises to us. God is happy to give us the kingdom. What we need is the faith knowing that God's promises are good and true. Amen.